let's hear it for estrogen. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this very, very small project that I constructed last summer and fall and then exhibited in November. And it's one of the smallest projects I've ever done. And it's also the most personal project, probably, I would say. So, in March of last year, the Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies here at the university approached me to propose a project commemorating the 20th anniversary of the fall of communism in my country of origin, Romania. I was particularly excited about this prospect, but I have to admit I didn't really know very much about my country. I had left at the age of 6, and I had only really been back since then for summer vacations. But I was lucky that my parents preserved the language for me so I could speak. In 1971, when I was 4 years old, my parents left Romania illegally. They traveled throughout Western Europe for about 2 years and then eventually received political asylum in the United States, where they settled. They weren't political dissidents, they were just ordinary citizens who needed refuge from a system they didn't believe in. And the United States provided them one. I think the two things that I remember most about these 2 years that I lived without them was my extended family that raised me during that time, and the oppressive attitude and nature of the place. So particularly the not being able to speak out loud on the streets and speak in your own house for fear of being overheard by neighbors. Is pretty famous by now, a story of the large number of civilians that were involved in spying on each other in a kind of civilian police force called the TEDx. In December of 1989, Romania revolted against the communist regime. By then, most of Eastern Europe had fallen. The revolution in Romania started in the city of Timișoara in this square called Arbor Square. You can see the opera building in the background there and the balconies that were used for public speeches to incite and inspire the crowds into revolution. The revolution lasted 7 days, from December 15th to the 22nd. This is Romania, and you can see the location of Timișoara. It's kind of on the far western edge of the country. Timișoara is the second largest city in the country, and its position to the far west is actually always strategic, and it always received more information than the kind of censorship that ended up happening in the capital city of Bucharest. Significantly, Romania, unlike the rest of Eastern Europe, did not have a velvet revolution. It had a bloody one. The city of Timișoara suffered hundreds of civilian casualties as the result of soldiers shooting on their own citizens. And as I kept learning about these events, I was pretty overwhelmed by what I could do as a response or proposal for a project. But I'm an architect, and so, well, I don't have to tell you about the ego of architects, right? So I decided, you know, monument. And this too is a monument. The Statue of Liberty is a monument that commemorates, like the one that I wanted to build, commemorates the centennial anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and it was a gift from this country of France. My monument was complicated because the revolution in Romania, and I guess this is true of all revolutions I've come to learn, was particularly dirty, and there was a lot of underhanded tactics used by both sides, as you can imagine. But maybe the most devastating thing about the revolution in Romania was what ended up happening, which is that all the revolutionaries who had taken over the city and eventually spread to the whole country, and the communist regime fell. All the people who had led the revolution were pushed out of power, And the people that came into power immediately after have all been members of the previous regime. And so even to this day, there's a kind of refute about whether or not it was actually even a revolution. So these are the kind of things that I needed to respond to. The singular object or pure symbol that denies the impurity of event or valorizes an impossible hero didn't seem possible for me as a project. It became also less palatable in many ways. And so I started looking around at many examples of contemporary expressions of complex historical events and the different ways that people are currently representing those events through monuments. And I'll just show you a couple of quick ones that were particularly influential. This is a project in Krakow commemorating a former Jewish ghetto. And I'm particularly interested in this piece at looking at the objects that were being used, these kind of household chairs, and the fact that they were being used in this public square and turning the public space into a different kind of space altogether, still a public square, but a monument too. I also looked at makeshift monuments throughout this time. They were pretty influential, and these are two for Princess Diana, but I was looking at the kind of the way that people were coming together as they were remembering her and the kind of objects they would leave behind at these sites and the kind of conversations they were having. I was particularly moved by monuments that did not use permanent materials, and I was starting to think of a possibility of using something impermanent rather than permanent as a solution for what I was thinking about. And maybe most significantly, I was interested in making a symbol or an object that was also not just commemorative, but critical in some way, that asked for participation on the part of the viewer, and maybe even implicated them or asked of them to participate in some way. The subject that, or what I call the project ultimately, is hot air. The term hot air has several significances in relationship to the revolution in Romania, for me. For one thing, hot air, heat was something that was rationed by the communist regime in the last period of the communist regime in the country of Romania, that it was particularly brutal. And they would ration things like food, but also heat from central heating plants. And so oftentimes in the very cold winters in cities, temperatures inside houses would be really low, sometimes as low as like 40 degrees. And you can imagine the kind of level of discomfort that that produced, and also, of course, much more radical things that it produced. Hot air was also significant for me because heat, during the revolution in Romania, this 7-day period in Timișoara, there was this kind of amazing weather reprieve. So even though it was December and there's usually snowfall and it's cold, it was a period of 7 days that the temperatures were in the 60s, and it was really comfortable for people. And I'm not trying to say that the hot air caused the revolution in any way, but it certainly allowed people to stay on the streets much longer, to resist fire hoses, and to have a much wider population, so there would be older people, younger people. It was just, it really increased the fervor on the streets. So I was kind of interested in this term, hot air. And I guess I don't have to tell you the third meaning of hot air. And air, of course, is cheap. And I don't get grants that are $900,000. So I needed cheap materials. We're looking now at a piece by Ant Farm, which is an artists and architects collective. And they were doing these projects in the 60s that were commentaries on the consumption of space in many ways. And in particular, kind of their words, they were looking for like the meaning of self-made space. So they were always using these inexpensive materials like common plastic to make these bubbles that people would collect in and gather in. And I was looking for the right symbol too, and so I was thinking a lot about what would be the appropriate symbol for this project. What kind of monument would you make here? And I was particularly interested in the ways that after revolutions, statues are toppled and then kept in the squares where the revolutions happened as a symbol of of the fall of the previous regime. We're looking at images now of 1956 in Budapest, where for a 14 or 15-day period, there was a countrywide revolution, but in the city of Budapest, the head of Stalin, now we see the toppled statue, stood in the square until the Russians came back in and took the city over again. So I was interested in these kind of head pieces that get left behind as kind of symbol to the end of revolutions, in combination with some sort of air. And then I got an email that my proposal for some sort of inflatable monument was accepted. I guess I'd tell you that, and I got a $3,500 grant. So take that, NASA. I do more with less. Okay. So this is Jimmy, the model for my eventual piece that I made. I chose a mannequin head. Well, I chose a head because I tested a lot of ideas that were more abstract. I've never worked representationally before. But I thought that the head would be something, because I wanted the piece to be very public and to have engagement with the people that are going to be coming to look at it. So I thought that making it representational would make it a lot more accessible so that people would see it as a recognizable object and therefore not sort of see it as high art or abstraction, anything that was a little bit less approachable. I used a mannequin. This is a very neutral head. I tried to find the most neutral kind of female-male head that I could find. And it had a lot to do, too, with that I wanted to represent the head of like as a fallen statue, but I didn't want it to be anyone in particular. And specifically, I didn't want it to be a revolutionary or a resistor or a soldier. I wanted it to represent everybody. I felt everybody had lost in this particular revolution. Everybody had been toppled to some extent. So we made it out of plastic. This is common polyethylene plastic. It's the kind of plastic that's by Home Depot. It's available to everyone. It's really important to me that the piece be made out of something that could be bought by anybody. I was going to a country where I was also making a suggestion about how people would embody their own space and use materials that they had accessible to them. This is my assistant, Lei, who's here with me today. And I have to tell you that I offered to pay Lei to help me make the project, but I told her I couldn't take her on the trip. And she said that she'd rather go on the trip. So she worked for free. We sealed the plastic with common household iron. You can see it down in the lower image there. This is us building it in my backyard. Really simple process. And this is it now spread out in my backyard. The ability to work in public, and more importantly to speak in public, is fundamental to democracies. It was what the Romanians had fought for 20 years in the past, and I thought it was some sort of measure too for the work that we would do there. Public space then is space that's available to anybody at all times of day, and maybe more importantly available for organizations and protests and demonstrations. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of quick projects because as we were building it, there was this amazing exhibit going on at the center, at the Canadian Center for Architecture, and it was called What You Can Do With Your City, and it was a whole lot of projects by young people working in public space and testing out their ideas of what they would do in public space. This is Mayor Lopez working in Dubai, and a kind of commentary on the ways that she was imagining people in public mixing. So this was a public square with lampposts and benches and kind of typical arrangements. And she painted this soccer pitch right on top of it as a kind of idea about the mixing that she wanted to see happening in that city. I'll say too that I think it's also a commentary on the shrinking nature of public space and the idea that maybe we don't need it anymore. I also was really moved by the pieces by Starting Cities, a French artist working in Paris. And he did a series of these projects where he was just nailing seat chairs to whatever he found in the city as a kind of comment on what he wanted to see in that city, or in conversation, small group conversations in public. And lastly, the one that it maybe ended up being pivotal to me is a piece by Norman DeHuben. And like the Lopez piece is a painted basketball court. You see it on the upper part where he painted the court. This is now in Amsterdam, in this kind of little leftover public triangle next to a housing development. And he painted this basketball suggestion. And the nicest part about this project is that about 2 months after he painted that on there, the city cooperated and put up a basketball hoop. And so what I like about that, or what got me thinking about that, was that, you know, I often think of the government in not such healthy terms, but I ended up imagining, sorry, but I ended up thinking, like, well, in this case, if you have to at least give them an opportunity to cooperate. So I ended up being almost completely finished with the piece, but not really yet having a site, and really wanting it to be in Arbor Square. I thought too of going rogue, of just kind of like showing up with it and blowing it up. But you know, Lay was coming, and people had put time and energy and money behind the project, so I had to come up with a different plan. So I called the mayor, and I told him that I had a gift for the people of Timisoara. And gifts, especially gifts to people of a place, are hard to deny. Remember the Statue of Liberty, and it too was a gift to the United States. But in receiving that gift, the United States bore a great deal of responsibility for receiving it. They had to provide a piece of land for the statue. They had to build a base. Maybe most significantly, they had to agree to take care of the statue for the rest of its life. And all of that came at a big price. There were a lot of fundraising events that happened in order to receive this gift. And so I was very enthusiastically kind of interested in the possibility of the city of Timisoara sort of becoming interested in the project. The city of Timisoara became the biggest benefactor in our project. They actually agreed to the project before they saw any images of it. I just said it was an inflatable monument. And this is them receiving the shipment, and then us on the bottom there, as part of my crew arriving. They housed us for the week of the display. They hired a crew for us that was there on site 24 hours a day. It was wonderful. So here we are. We made it to Arbor Square. You see the Arbor building in present day, and this is the inflatable on the ground being ready. We did some tests in the first 2 days that we were there to see how it would work. These are our first test inflations going up. We're kind of just checking out the site, et cetera, figuring some stuff out. I should tell you too that there was a whole event that grew around the head, and you can see it in the lower, or in the far right over there. These placards that are down became a big graffiti artist kind of exhibition. If you can't see the head right now, it's kind of hard. It was tough to see it close up because it is kind of abstract. So there's the eyes and the back. And here it is lit up at night. When we had it with the graffiti panels now up. So the great graffiti artist kind of took some time throughout the week painting. And we kind of enjoyed these kind of amazing sort of shadows that happened. We had never had a chance to light it. We didn't own lights, it was their lights, so it was pretty great to kind of get there and see the shadows and then think about the kind of events that we could. We ended up having a little dance party as a result of seeing these shadows, so that was pretty great. We met a lot of people. At night, we mostly met young people who came out to talk to us about the piece. And maybe my favorite part was just watching how people interacted with it and kind of got pleasure out of seeing this really strange plastic thing on a site they normally don't see, something like that. Kids came out during the day. We had some problems. Wind was a big problem for us. The first 2 days were difficult. This is the second day. This is the mayor of Timisoara right here in the white jacket. And he came out on the day, but this was a particularly windy day. You can see, I tried to find a picture where you can see the wind blowing. It was was pretty rough, so we had to quickly get out after he left on this day. Oh, and this is an American senator who happened to be visiting from Illinois, actually. Not of my particular political persuasion. You know, I was like, oh, hello. We had some problems with drainage, but we fixed those pretty quickly. It rained a couple of days, but we got that under control. Maybe the biggest difficulties came in trying to talk to people about the piece. I was particularly interested in talking to people in their 60s, 70s, people who had spent a really significant portion of their adult lives under the communist regime, and then also after the communist regime. And I just wanted to hear stories about their experience, their kind of life experience. But a lot of these people weren't so, interested in art, for one thing, it hadn't really, been a big subject, or contemporary art hadn't been such a big subject in Romania, so it was difficult. I think they wanted an explanation from me, and I wanted a story from them. Maybe the hardest thing that happened to us, or the most deflating part of the entire experience, is what happened in the media. The local and national media all represented the piece as the head of Lenin. So this is when representational art came back to bite me a little bit, because making it a head, which I thought was neutral, just made people want to attach something to it. And so they made it into somebody. And for some reason they made it into Lenin. This is straight out of the newspapers. They made this, they photoshopped this. And there's my name right up there. This was really weird, and all I could think of is because it had some sort of likeness, because of course, Lenin was he was from a different country, he was from a different era, he was from a different revolution. And I was really concerned about it. I was really, really disappointed and upset, because I was afraid that people would also assume that I was supporting a kind of reversion to another set of ideals that I wasn't. It was the lowest moment in the entire kind of display for me. So this is a piece lit up on the last night. We lit it in yellow on this night. We lit it that way because my mom happened to really like it in yellow, and my entire family came with me, so that was also particularly great. And on the kind of last official night of the piece, and some of the last visitors that came to see me, there was a couple, an older couple, that came into the head. I was talking a lot inside the head to the people. And this older couple, we were just kind of talking about nothing for a while, and finally the woman in the couple asked me, well, why did you make this piece? And I told her that I made it because I wanted to learn a little bit more about my country, a place that was still particularly meaningful for me. And I wanted to get some stories. I wanted to get stories that I couldn't get out of history books. And so for that, she proceeded to tell me about her experience throughout the week of the revolution. She and her husband had participated the entire time. And then she told me too about after the revolution that she and her husband had both lost their jobs and had never quite gotten back to where they had been before that. But she told me, and this was really different than what a lot of people told me, she told me that she was happy about it and that it had made a difference, that she felt that it was important that the revolution had happened because she could speak freely. She could speak what was in her heart, and that was the whole point of the revolution in the first place. And then she asked me if I knew how the revolution had ended in Timișoara. And I didn't. And she said to me, she told me the story about December 22nd. December 22nd, Nicolae Ceausescu, who had been the dictator in Romania for 43 years, had been captured. And in the square, people were still demonstrating, it was really packed. There was a very loud and very long and sustained roar of happiness and approval. And then she said, there was the quietest hush, like silence. And when she looked up, everyone had turned away from the opera house and toward the cathedral at the other end of the square, on their knees. A relief. Now, I had never heard that story, and I'm really grateful that I have. So here's what I know. It doesn't take a lot of money or technology. But what we need really still is public space and access to strangers who we never would talk to otherwise. So I highly recommend you give a gift. That's it.